"Your mother is alive. I saw her in the dumpster. Are you sure? Tell me the truth." The poor boy shouted at the millionaire. "Your mother is alive. I saw her in the dumpster." What happened next would change his destiny forever. Before starting the story, comment from what place you're watching us. I hope you enjoy this story. Don't forget to subscribe. The spotlights bathed the stage in a golden, blinding light, creating an atmosphere of unreality that enveloped the city's elite gathered in that New York City event hall. Philip Ballard, heir to an empire and a figure in philanthropy, finished his speech with the rehearsed elegance of someone born under public scrutiny. The crystal glasses tinkled softly on the tables, accompanying the polite applause from executives and journalists who admired the perfect image of success. However, that perfection was about to shatter from a chaotic and unexpected force that would change the destiny of everyone present. Suddenly, an unusual murmur began to spread from the main entrance, growing like a wave breaking the calm of a serene sea, alerting the security guards. A boy with torn clothes and a face smeared with street grime burst into the hall, dodging the arms of the agents trying to stop him. His breathing was ragged. His bare feet slapped the polished marble with desperation, and his eyes frantically searched for one figure on the stage. The crowd parted with a mix of horror and curiosity, leaving a clear path toward the man who, bewildered, stopped his words mid-sentence. The boy planted himself in front of the stage, panting with his heart about to burst from his mouth, while security surrounded him, ready to drag him out of that forbidden place. Philip raised a hand to stop the guards, feeling a strange connection with the urgent, truth-filled gaze of the small intruder challenging him. "And Mr. Ballard," shouted the kid with a voice that tore through the sepulchral silence of the hall, ignoring the hands already gripping his shoulders. "Your mom isn't dead. I found her in the dumpster. She's alive, and she sent me to find you," he exclaimed forcefully. The silence that followed that declaration was absolute, heavy like a slab of concrete falling on the conscience of all the attendees at the charity event. Ariana, Philip's fiancée, approached quickly with a nervous smile painted on her lips, trying to minimize the impact of those delirious words. "Philip, please, don't pay attention to him. He's just a confused kid looking for money," she whispered in the millionaire's ear, grabbing his arm firmly. But Philip couldn't move. The boy's words had detonated a bomb inside him, awakening a doubt he'd kept dormant for months. "What did you say?" asked Philip, ignoring the pressure of Ariana's hand and stepping to the edge of the stage to look the boy directly in his dark eyes. The little one struggled with the guards, freeing an arm to search for something in his pocket, an object that gleamed under the artificial lights like a star. "She gave me this," said the boy, tossing the object at Philip's feet, where it landed with a metallic, dry sound. It was an ancient rosary with golden beads worn by time and constant prayer, identical to the one his mother always carried. Philip knelt slowly, as if fearing the object would vanish upon touch, and his fingers instantly recognized the familiar texture of the beads and the cross. A vivid memory assaulted him, his mother sitting at the piano, playing a soft melody while the rosary rested on the instrument's lid, shining in the afternoon light. "It's impossible," murmured Philip with a broken voice, feeling the ground beneath his feet begin to shake and his reality crumble. Ariana, visibly shaken, tried to snatch the rosary with a brusque, disguised gesture, claiming it was a vulgar coincidence without any importance. "Many rosaries look alike. Love, don't let this ruin the most important night of your career," she insisted with a tone mixing plea and imperative command. But Philip stood up, clutching the rosary in his fist with such force that the edges of the cross dug into his palm, causing unnecessary pain. "What's your name?" he asked the boy, completely ignoring his fiancée and the hundreds of cameras now broadcasting the moment live. "Matthew," replied the kid, stopping his fight against the guards, knowing he'd captured the attention of the only man who mattered. "Let him go," ordered Philip with an authority that brooked no argument, causing the guards to step back and let the boy breathe freely in the center of the floor. Matthew adjusted his dirty clothes with dignity and held the millionaire's gaze, conveying an honesty that contrasted with the falseness of the expensive suits around. "She told me you'd recognize the rosary. It has a mark on the cross from when it fell in the old house," explained Matthew. Philip turned the cross, and there was the small notch that only he and his mother knew, the irrefutable proof of the truth. The crowd's murmur transformed into a buzz of speculations and gossip, While journalists typed frantically on their mobile devices about the scandal, Ariana felt the situation slipping from her hands. Her pale face reflected a terror beyond simple social embarrassment. "Philip, this is madness. Your mother was cremated. We have the certificate. We have the ashes," she argued, raising her voice to be heard. Philip looked at her, and for the first time, he saw something in Ariana's eyes that wasn't love, but a deep, calculating fear. "I never saw her body," said Philip in a low voice, but his words resonated with the force of a revelation that had taken too long to come to light. He remembered the closed casket on medical recommendation, the rushed funeral arrangements organized by Ariana and Dr. Belmont, and the sealed urn. Matthew took a step forward, breaking the invisible barrier separating their worlds, and spoke with a voice loaded with urgency. "She says she's waiting for you, that she prays for you, and that she plays music in her head so she doesn't forget who she is." That mention of music was the final blow to Philip's skepticism. No one outside the family knew that music was his mother's secret refuge. A solitary tear rolled down Philip's cheek, captured by the camera lenses, humanizing the untouchable magnate before the entire nation. "Get him out of here right now," screamed Ariana, losing her composure, signaling to a security chief who seemed to hesitate amid the contradictory orders. Before they could touch him again, Philip raised his hand and stopped any attempt at aggression toward the messenger of his mother. "If you touch this boy, you'll have me to deal with," warned Philip, and his threat hung in the air, loaded with real danger that chilled the blood of those present. He approached Matthew and knelt to his level, ignoring the dirt and bad smell emanating from the kid's clothes. "Where is she?" he asked with contained desperation, needing a location, a point on the map to run to right then. "In the dumpster in East Harlem, but you have to hurry, some men were watching her," whispered Matthew with fear in his eyes. The mention of men watching triggered an alarm in Philip's mind, suggesting this wasn't simple abandonment, but something much more sinister and orchestrated. He stood up, tucked the rosary into the inner pocket of his jacket near his heart, and looked at Ariana with a new, unknown coldness. "The event is over," he announced into the microphone, dropping the device with a dry thud that echoed through the speakers and marked the end of the farce. He walked toward the exit with Matthew following a few steps behind, while the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Upon leaving the hotel, the cold night air hit Philip's face, helping to clear the fog of confusion and focus his mind on a single mission. Ariana ran after him, her heels echoing on the pavement, shouting excuses and pleas that got lost in the city's night wind. "You can't leave like this. It's our reputation," she shrieked, clinging to the only thing that really mattered to her, her status and public image. Philip stopped by his car, opened the door for Matthew to get in, then turned to face his fiancée one last time. "My reputation is worth nothing if my mother is alive and suffering in a dumpster while I sip champagne." He spat at her with a quiet but devastating rage. Ariana stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching the luxury car pull away, taking with it the man who guaranteed her future. Inside the vehicle, the silence was thick, broken only by the soft hum of the engine and Matthew's ragged breathing, who marveled at the interior. Philip drove with white knuckles on the steering wheel, his mind reviewing every detail of the last months, searching for cracks in the lie. "Are you hungry?" asked Philip suddenly, realizing the boy probably hadn't eaten in days to reach him and deliver the message. Matthew nodded shyly, not daring to touch the leather upholstery, keeping his hands in his lap as if apologizing for existing. Philip detoured to a drive-through, buying plenty of food, watching as the boy devoured a burger with gratitude that broke his soul. "Thanks, sir," said Matthew with his mouth full. "Mrs. Karen always said you were good, that you had a noble heart." Those words, Mrs. Karen, confirmed the boy knew her intimately, as the trusted employees at the family estate called her that many years ago. Philip felt a mix of hope and corrosive guilt. He had accepted his mother's death too quickly, trusting blindly in those around him. The night stretched before them, dark and full of uncertainty, but for the first time in a long time, Philip had a clear and vital purpose. He wouldn't return to his penthouse to sleep. That night, he would begin the search for the truth, no matter what or whom he had to destroy. The city passed swiftly through the windows, a blur of neon lights and shadows hiding secrets in every corner, indifferent to the drama of its inhabitants. Philip looked at the rosary he'd taken out again and hung it on the rearview mirror, where it swayed hypnotically with the car's movement. That small object of faith now became his compass, the beacon guiding him through the storm of lies that had ruled his life. With Matthew as co-pilot and guide, the millionaire ventured into the night, ready to challenge death itself to recover what had been stolen from him. The arrival at the penthouse was silent. Philip entered with Matthew, who observed the lavish apartment with wide, fearful eyes, feeling out of place. Philip indicated the boy could rest on the large living room sofa, handing him a soft blanket that seemed to swallow the small body. While Matthew fell exhausted, Philip went to his study, a sanctuary of wood and leather where he kept the most important documents. He needed to review the medical file. He needed to see with his own eyes the papers he'd signed months ago with eyes closed in grief. He turned on the desk lamp and pulled out Philip Ballard's folder from the file cabinet, feeling a physical weight in his chest upon reading his mother's name on the label. He spread the documents on the mahogany table: death certificates, clinic reports, cremation authorizations, and exorbitant medical service bills. Everything seemed in order, with official stamps and legible signatures, a perfectly orchestrated bureaucracy of death designed not to raise suspicions in a grieving son. However, Philip now looked with suspicious eyes, searching for any inconsistency, any error that would reveal the lie. His eyes stopped on a transfer authorization supposedly signed by him 2 days before his mother's official death, a date when he was out of the country. "I didn't sign this," he whispered to himself, running his finger over the ink that imitated his handwriting with terrifying but imperfect precision. He remembered Ariana had handled all the paperwork that week, claiming she wanted to relieve him of that painful burden so he could process his loss. The betrayal began to take shape, a painful form with the face of the woman he planned to marry. Ariana entered the study at that moment, having arrived at the apartment minutes after him, with smudged makeup and a rehearsed expression of false concern. "Philip, please, put those papers away. You're torturing yourself needlessly over a street kid's fantasies," she said, approaching cautiously. She tried to place a hand on his shoulder, but Philip pulled away abruptly, as if her physical touch burned his skin. "Why is there a signature of mine on this transfer document dated when I was in London?" he asked without looking at her, fixing his gaze on the paper. Ariana paled visibly, though she tried to recover quickly with a nervous, condescending laugh that sounded false in the tense silence of the room. "You probably signed before leaving and don't remember. You were very stressed with the company merger. Love, the mind plays tricks on us. I don't forget what I sign," replied Philip with an icy voice, lifting his gaze to lock his eyes on hers, seeking the truth in her evasive look. "And I also don't forget that you insisted Dr. Belmont handle everything personally, closing access to other doctors. Dr. Belmont is an eminence. We only wanted the best for Karen." Ariana defended herself, stepping back from the intensity of the implicit accusation. "The best or the most convenient," murmured Philip, turning back to review the toxicology reports showing strange levels of sedatives. Each page he turned revealed unsettling patterns: high doses of unnecessary medications, total patient isolation, prohibition of visits. It was a legalized kidnapping, a confinement disguised as intensive care under the supervision of a bought professional. "I'm going to the clinic first thing tomorrow," announced Philip, closing the folder with a slam that sounded like a judge's gavel delivering sentence. "For what? You'll just make a fool of yourself and reopen wounds that were already healing," shouted Ariana, losing patience and the mask of understanding girlfriend. "The wound never closed because there was no body, Ariana. And if I find out you had anything to do with it, you'll have nowhere to hide," he sentenced. Ariana stormed out of the study, slamming the door, and Philip heard her making a hurried phone call in the hallway, speaking in frantic whispers. Philip approached the door and pressed his ear, catching fragments of Ariana's conversation. "Yes, he knows something. The kid brought the rosary. You have to erase everything." Those words were the final confirmation he needed. It wasn't paranoia. It was a real conspiracy happening under his own roof. He returned to the desk and took a photo of his mother, silently promising to dismantle every brick of that lie until he found her. The night advanced, and sleep was impossible. Adrenaline and anger kept him awake, mapping out the next steps mentally. He went out to the living room and saw Matthew had woken up and was looking at the city's night landscape through the huge glass windows. "Do you think we'll find her?" asked the boy with a small voice, contrasting the immensity of the illuminated skyscrapers before him. "I promise you, Matthew. Tomorrow we'll go search for answers wherever necessary," replied Philip, standing beside him and looking at the city that now seemed hostile. The boy pulled a crumpled drawing made in pencil on dirty paper from his pocket and handed it to Philip shyly. "She drew this for you. She said to give it to you when I saw you," explained Matthew. Philip took the paper and unfolded it carefully. It was a simple drawing of a piano and a house with many windows and flowers. In the corner, in his mother's shaky handwriting, was a recent date after her supposed death. Philip felt a lump in his throat. That was the most tangible proof of life he had, beyond the rosary. It was a direct message from her. "Thanks, Matthew. This is worth more than everything in this apartment," said Philip sincerely, tucking the drawing with the rosary. The next morning, Philip got up before dawn, prepared a quick breakfast for both, and dressed in comfortable clothes, leaving behind the designer suits. He didn't want to attract attention. He wanted answers. He left a note for Ariana saying not to wait for him. A cold, distant message. As they left the building, he noticed a black car with tinted windows parked across the street, a detail he would have ignored at another time. His instinct told him they were being watched, that the enemy already knew he was on the move and the hunt had begun. They got into his SUV, and Philip took an indirect route to the clinic, constantly checking the rear-view mirrors to ensure they weren't followed. Matthew looked at everything with curiosity, pointing out places he knew from his street kid perspective, an invisible map of urban survival. "That's where the ones without cardboard sleep," he said, pointing to a bridge, reminding Philip of the harsh reality his mother had shared these months. Each comment from Matthew increased Philip's determination to get his mother out of that hell and compensate for every second of suffering. They arrived at St. Francis Clinic, a modern building of glass and steel promising health and wellness in exchange for fortunes. Philip parked the car and asked Matthew to wait hidden in the back seat with the doors locked for protection. "If I take too long or if you see something weird, honk the horn non-stop," he instructed, handing him a prepaid cell phone he'd bought on the way. Philip walked toward the main entrance, feeling rage turn into a calculated coldness necessary to face the monsters in white coats. The receptionist greeted him with a rehearsed smile that froze upon seeing the serious, determined expression of the millionaire without an appointment. "Mr. Ballard, what a surprise. Are you here to see Dr. Belmont?" she asked with a tone denoting evident nervousness. "I'm here to see my mother's full history, including the security camera records from her last days," demanded Philip without beating around the bush. The woman swallowed and began typing quickly, probably sending a silent alert to administration or the doctor herself. "I'm sorry, sir. Those files are on the central server, and I need authorization from management to access them," she lied poorly. "I don't need authorization to see my own mother's data. Call the director right now," ordered Philip, slapping the counter with his palm. The attention in the lobby drew looks from other patients and staff, creating the public scene Philip needed to pressure. At that moment, Dr. Jane Belmont appeared, walking with a firm step and a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Philip, dear, to what do we owe this honor?" "Ariana called saying you were a bit upset," said the doctor, trying to take control of the situation. "I want to see the real records, Jane. I know the reports you gave me are fake," shot Philip, observing the micro-expression of panic on the woman's face. "Let's talk in my office, please. Let's not make a spectacle here," she suggested, guiding him to a side hallway away from curious eyes. Philip followed her, knowing he was entering the wolf's den, but confident the truth was about to surface. In the office, the doctor closed the door, and her attitude changed drastically, dropping the mask of professional kindness. "I don't know what that delinquent kid has put in your head, but you're making a grave mistake doubting us," she threatened subtly. "The mistake was believing I could trust you and Ariana." "How much did she pay you or promise you?" asked Philip, approaching the desk. The doctor sat and crossed her arms, a defensive posture. "Your mother was very sick, Philip. We did what we could. The rest are your fantasies caused by grief." Philip saw a USB drive connected to the doctor's computer, a blinking light indicating recent activity. With a quick movement, he leaned in and yanked the device before she could react or stop him. "What are you doing? That's private property," shouted Doctor. Belmont, standing from her chair, trying unsuccessfully to recover the device. "Consider it a surprise audit," said Philip, pocketing the USB and backing toward the door. "If the proofs are here, you'll rot in jail," he warned before leaving. He ran down the hallway, ignoring the doctor's shouts calling security, knowing he had the key to the mystery in his pocket. He exited the clinic and got into the SUV, where Matthew waited with wide eyes, scared by the commotion. "Let's go," shouted Philip, starting the engine and speeding out of the parking lot, leaving the guards behind. While driving away, he knew he'd declared open war, but also knew he was one step closer to finding Karen. The trip back to a safe place was tense. Philip constantly checked the mirrors, fearing the clinic's security or the police might try to stop him. He decided not to return to the penthouse. It was a compromised place where Ariana had access and control. Instead, he headed to a small apartment he used as a private office, a place few knew about. Matthew remained silent, sensing the gravity of the situation but trusting blindly in the man driving with such determination. Upon arriving, Philip plugged the stolen USB into an isolated computer, fearing encryption or a virus, but the doctor's arrogance worked in his favor. The files were protected by simple passwords that Philip cracked after a couple of logical attempts related to dates. What he found chilled him: folders with patient names, and in his mother's, a subfolder titled Special Transfer AM. Ariana Miller's initials confirmed her direct complicity in the operation. He opened the documents and read with horror the details of a macabre plan. Karen had been over-sedated to simulate an irreversible coma. Then, a nighttime administrative discharge through the service door was detailed, while officially her death was declared in room 402. There were payment receipts to a dubious cargo transport company and a clandestine crematorium that had delivered ashes of unknown origin. The coldness with which his mother was described as the package made Philip's blood boil. "What does it say there?" asked Matthew, approaching the bright screen, unable to understand the illegal medical terms but catching Philip's fury. "It says they sold her. Matthew, they took her out asleep and handed her to someone to disappear her," explained Philip with a hoarse voice, trying not to scare the boy. But there was a video file, a security recording the doctor had saved, perhaps as life insurance against Ariana. Philip played it and saw the grainy image of a stretcher exiting through a loading dock at midnight. In the video, two men loaded the stretcher into a grey van, and on the side, supervising everything, was Ariana handing a bulging envelope to the driver. Karen moved a hand under the sheets in the video, a slight but unmistakable movement, proving she was alive at that moment. Philip punched the table with his fist, feeling a mix of relief at seeing her alive and pure hatred toward the woman who'd slept in his bed. "There she is," pointed Matthew at the screen. "That's the truck I saw near the dumpster once, the one with the red letters." Philip paused the video and zoomed in on the van's side. Though blurry, a partial logo was visible: Transalme. It was the clue they needed, the physical connection between the luxury clinic and Matthew's world. "We have to go to the dumpster, Matthew. I need to see where she was. I need to talk to the people who saw her," said Philip, standing up. He knew it was dangerous, but he had nothing left to lose. His previous comfortable blind life had died in that instant. The trip to the East Harlem dumpster was a descent into the city's hells, going from tree-lined avenues to dirt roads full of potholes and trash. The smell of decomposition penetrated even with the windows closed, a brutal reminder of the reality his mother had endured. Upon arriving, the landscape was desolate. Mountains of waste rose like monuments to consumption, and among them, people scavenged for sustenance. Philip got out of the car, feeling his expensive shoes were an offense in that place, but he advanced, following Matthew. "This way, Mr. Philip. Watch out for the glass," guided the boy with the agility of someone who knew every trap in the terrain. The people in the dumpster looked at them with distrust. A man in a clean suit meant trouble or authorities. Matthew greeted some, introducing them as friends, which softened the hostile looks from the scavengers a bit. They reached an area of shacks built with plastics and cardboards where the wind blew, lifting dust and empty bags. "She slept here," said Matthew, pointing to a precarious structure barely standing with a rusted sheet metal roof. Philip entered, having to crouch, and saw the interior: a wooden box as a table, an old damp mattress, and a small altar with plastic flowers. His heart broke imagining his mother, a cultured and refined woman, living in those subhuman conditions but maintaining her dignity. On the cardboard wall was a drawing made with charcoal of a treble clef and musical notes, Karen's indelible signature. An old man approached the shack's entrance, leaning on a cane made from a PVC pipe, looking at Philip with curiosity. "Are you the son of the lady?" asked the old man with a raspy voice from the trash-burning smoke. Philip nodded, unable to speak from the emotion closing his throat. "She talked a lot about you. She said you'd come." No one believed her. "We thought she was delirious from fever, but she always had faith." "Was she sick?" asked Philip, worried about his mother's health after months of deprivation. "Yes, she coughed a lot at night, but still shared her bread with the kids," recounted the old man. "She was a saint. She taught some of us to read. She told us stories of music and theaters." Philip caressed the charcoal drawing on the wall, feeling a spiritual connection with his mother in that miserable place she'd tried to turn into a home. "Did you see when they took her?" asked Philip, needing to confirm what he'd seen in the video or discover a new transfer. "Some men came a week ago. They said they were from a foundation, but they had bad faces," explained the old man. "They loaded her into a grey truck. She didn't want to leave without saying goodbye to Matthew, but they didn't let her." The old man coughed and spat on the ground. "That truck smelled like chemicals. It wasn't from any foundation." Philip pulled out his wallet and gave the old man all the cash he had, who looked surprised. "Thanks for taking care of her. I promise I'll come back to help everyone here. But first I must find her," swore Philip. The old man nodded and tucked the money away with trembling hands. "Go with God, son, and take care of Matthew. He was the one who protected her the most when others wanted to steal her things." They left the dumpster with the sun setting behind them, tinting the sky blood red, seeming to foreshadow the coming conflict. Philip now had confirmation from both ends of the chain, the clinic and the dumpster, but the final link was missing the place where they had her now. The Transalm clue and the chemical smell mentioned by the old man pointed to a specific industrial area. Philip got into the car with renewed determination. The night would be long, but the truth shone ever brighter. Darkness had fallen completely over the city when Philip and Matthew left behind the dumpster's stench, but the smell seemed to have impregnated their clothes and Philip's soul. He drove in silence, processing the image of the miserable shack where his mother had lived, contrasting it with the luxury of the penthouse where Ariana slept peacefully. The injustice burned within him, but he knew he had to keep a cool head to follow the clues correctly. "Matthew, you said you saw the truck near a warehouse before. Do you remember where?" asked Philip, breaking the silence. "Yes, it's in the old factory area where the river smells bad," replied the boy, referring to the abandoned industrial zone on the outskirts. Philip knew the place. It was a labyrinth of bankrupt warehouses and vacant lots serving as hideouts for illicit activities. He directed the car there, turning off the main lights upon entering the dirt roads to avoid detection. The full moon illuminated the concrete and rusted metal structures ghostly, rising like giant skeletons. As they advanced, Matthew looked out the window attentively, searching for landmarks amid the darkness and elongated shadows. "There, that's the warehouse from the drawing," exclaimed the boy suddenly, pointing to a large structure with a half-collapsed roof. Philip stopped the car at a prudent distance and observed there was light inside the warehouse, filtering through the wall cracks. He also saw a grey van parked outside, the same from the clinic video, with the Trans-Alme logo visible. "Stay here. Matthew, lock the doors and don't open for anyone but me," ordered Philip, taking a flashlight and a lug wrench from the trunk as his only weapon. He approached the warehouse stealthily, using the wind noise hitting the loose sheets to cover his steps. Upon reaching a low, broken window, he peeked carefully to see inside, stacked boxes with biological waste labels, and in a corner, an improvised cell with bars. Inside the cell, no one was there. It was empty, but there were signs of recent occupation, a thrown blanket, a half-empty water bottle. Philip circled the building, looking for an entrance, finding a side door ajar from some guard's carelessness. He entered holding his breath, moving between the shadows of the boxes, hearing voices coming from an office on the second floor of the metal structure. He climbed the rusted metal stairs carefully not to make noise until he could hear the conversation. "The old lady's no good anymore. She's too weak. The boss says we have to move her to St. Gabriel before she dies here," said a hoarse male voice. That refuge is too far. It's a risk to transport her now that the son is asking questions on TV, replied another man. Philip gripped the lug wrench, feeling the urge to burst in and beat them until they told him where St. Gabriel was. But there were two, possibly armed. A direct confrontation could be fatal and leave his mother with no one to search for her. He decided information was more valuable than immediate revenge. St. Gabriel Refuge was the code name he needed. He descended the stairs with the same care, but upon stepping on the last rung, the metal creaked loudly under his weight, giving away his presence. "Who's there?" shouted one of the men from above. Footsteps running and the sound of a gun being loaded were heard. Philip ran toward the exit, pushing boxes to create obstacles, while the men descended shouting and firing into the air. He exited the warehouse and ran to the car, where Matthew watched terrified through the window at the gunshots. Philip dove into the driver's seat, started the engine, and accelerated full throttle, raising a cloud of dust that momentarily blinded his pursuers. The grey van started after them, beginning a dangerous chase on the uneven dirt roads of the industrial zone. Philip maneuvered skillfully, thankful for the defensive driving courses he'd taken years ago for corporate security. "Duck, Matthew," he shouted as the van tried to ram them from the side to force them off the road. Philip saw a gap in a factory's perimeter fence and swerved sharply, entering a terrain full of debris where the van couldn't maneuver well. They managed to lose them in the labyrinth of buildings, finally exiting onto the illuminated highway where traffic provided protection. Philip's heart pounded wildly, but a triumphant smile formed on his face. He knew where they were taking her. "Are you okay?" he asked Matthew, who was pale but nodded bravely, clutching the seatbelt. "I heard them say St. Gabriel. Do you know where that is?" asked the boy, showing he'd been attentive to every detail. "It's an old leper colony turned asylum in the Catskill Mountains, a place forgotten by God," replied Philip, recalling hearing about that place in some charity report. It was the perfect spot to hide someone who shouldn't exist, isolated, inaccessible, and without supervision. Philip drove to a gas station to fill up and buy a physical map, not wanting to trust GPS that could be tracked if his phone was tapped. He traced the route to the mountains. It was a 4-hour drive. He looked at Matthew, struggling to keep his eyes open. "Sleep a bit, hero. Tomorrow will be the most important day of our lives," he said tenderly. The boy settled and closed his eyes, fully trusting Philip would keep his promise. While driving under the stars, Philip thought of Ariana and how she must be moving her pieces at that moment. Surely she already knew he'd been to the clinic and perhaps suspected he'd found the warehouse. He had to act fast before she gave the order to disappear the problem for good. He pulled out the prepaid phone and called his trusted lawyer, Luis, waking him at that untimely hour. "Luis, listen carefully and don't ask. I need you to prepare a lawsuit for fraud, kidnapping, and attempted homicide against Ariana Miller and Jane Belmont," said Philip coldly. "Philip, have you gone mad? Do you have proof?" replied Luis with a sleepy, alarmed voice. "I have videos, documents, and witnesses. By noon tomorrow, I want the police waiting at my penthouse. I'll bring my mother." He hung up before Luis could object, sealing his ex-fiancée's fate. The road began ascending toward the mountains, and fog appeared, enveloping the car in a white, mysterious mantle. Philip felt he was ascending toward the truth, leaving behind the lie that had been his life in the city. Every mile brought him closer to his mother's arms, and that certainty gave him inexhaustible energy. He wouldn't stop, wouldn't rest until he saw Karen's face and asked forgiveness for taking so long. While Philip drove toward the mountains, in the city, Ariana's perfect world began crumbling at a dizzying speed. Dr. Belmont had called her hysterical after the USB theft, warning that Philip had all the compromising information. Ariana, in panic, tried contacting her press allies to launch a preventive smear campaign against Philip. Say he's lost his mind from grief, that he's under the influence of a street con artist, she ordered her publicist over the phone. The morning news began broadcasting rumors about the Ballard heir's mental stability, sowing doubts in public opinion. Ariana watched the news from the penthouse, drinking coffee with trembling hands, hoping the crazy narrative would suffice to invalidate any accusation. But fear gnawed at her. She knew Philip was methodical and wouldn't stop at anything after going to the clinic. She started packing a suitcase with jewels and cash, preparing for a possible escape if things went wrong. Suddenly, her phone vibrated with a notification. A video was going viral on social media, uploaded from an anonymous account. It was the clinic's security video Philip had extracted, showing Karen's illegal transfer and Ariana paying the bribe. In minutes, comments went from doubt to hate. The image of the devoted girlfriend shattered before millions of eyes. Ariana threw the phone against the wall, screaming in frustration, watching her house of cards collapse. She tried leaving the apartment, but upon opening the door, she found 2 building security guards looking at her sternly. "Mr. Ballard has given orders that no one enters or leaves with valuables until he returns," informed one of them. "I'm the owner of this house." "Move!" she shrieked, trying to push them, but it was useless. She was trapped in the golden cage she'd helped close, a prisoner of her own boundless ambition. Meanwhile, Philip and Matthew arrived at the foothills of the Catskill Mountains, where St. Gabriel Refuge was located. The sun began to rise, illuminating the rugged, solitary landscape, dissipating the fog and nocturnal fears. The road was dirt and stones, hard to traverse, confirming it was a place designed not to be visited. Matthew woke and looked at the green landscape in awe. He'd never seen so many trees, he said, reminding Philip how small the boy's world had been until then. "Soon you'll see something better, Matthew. You'll see Mrs. Karen," assured Philip, though inside he felt nervousness from the unknown. What if they'd arrived late? What if they'd moved her again? Those questions tortured him, but he didn't let it show to avoid distressing the boy. Finally, after a sharp curve, the rusted iron gate of the refuge appeared with a barely readable sign: St. Gabriel, peace and rest. Philip stopped the car in front of the gate, closed with a chain and thick padlock, blocking vehicular passage. "We'll have to walk from here," he said, getting out and helping Matthew. They jumped the perimeter fence at a point where the wire was down and entered the old leper colony's grounds. The main building was an old stone house with barred windows and an air of abandonment that raised hairs. No guards or nurses were seen, only sepulchral silence broken by some birds' songs and the wind in the pines. Philip advanced cautiously toward the main entrance, but Matthew tugged his sleeve and pointed to a side garden. "Listen, it's music," whispered the boy. Philip strained his ear and indeed heard a soft humming, a familiar melody coming from the back of the house. They ran toward the sound, circling the building through overgrown bushes and broken angel statues covered in moss. Upon reaching the back garden, the scene they saw stopped time for Philip. Under a huge tree, seated in an old wheelchair, was a female figure with her back turned, looking toward the valley. She wore a blue headscarf, the same Matthew had described, and moved her fingers on her knees as if playing an invisible piano. Philip felt his legs fail. The emotion was so strong he almost fell to his knees right there. Matthew ran ahead shouting, "Mrs. Karen! Mrs. Karen!" The woman stopped her movement and turned her head slowly, as if waking from a deep dream. Upon seeing the boy, a smile lit her tired, gaunt face. "Matthew, I knew you'd come," she said, with a weak but loving voice. Philip stepped out from among the trees with tears freely running down his face, approaching step by step the woman who'd given him life. Karen raised her gaze, and upon seeing him, her eyes filled with a shine surpassing any illness. "Philip, my son," she whispered, extending a trembling hand toward him. Philip ran the last meters and knelt at her feet, hugging her desperately, feeling her warmth, her scent, her reality. "Forgive me, Mom. Forgive me for not knowing, for leaving you alone." Philip sobbed, hiding his face in his mother's lap like when he was a child. She caressed his hair with infinite tenderness. "There's nothing to forgive, my love. Love always finds its way back," she consoled him. Matthew joined the hug, completing the circle of reunion under the old tree's shade. At that moment, the building's back door opened, and a man looking like a nurse came out, surprised to see them there. "Hey, you can't be here," he shouted, trying to intimidate them. Philip stood, wiping his tears and transforming back into the powerful man he was. "It's over. I'm Philip Ballard, and this woman is coming with me right now. If you try to stop me, I swear you won't walk out of here." He threatened with such ferocity that the man backed away scared and fled inside. Philip took the wheelchair and began pushing it toward the exit, with Matthew walking proudly beside like a victorious guardian. "We're going home, Mum. To the real home," promised Philip. Karen smiled, looking at the blue sky, knowing her long nightmare had ended and music would sound in her life again. The return to the city would be the start of justice, but at that moment, only being together mattered. The journey back was slow but full of peace. Karen dozed in the passenger seat with Philip holding her hand the whole time. Matthew in the back looked at the landscape with the satisfaction of mission accomplished. Philip felt that for the first time in his life, he was truly rich, not from his money, but from recovering the only thing money couldn't buy. As the car descended from the mountains, Philip recalled the details that led him there, pieces of a sinister puzzle now making total sense. The grey truck clue from Transalm wasn't just the physical location but the financial key to the crime. During the hours before the rescue, Philip had sent photos of the truck to his private security team to investigate the company. The report had arrived on his phone. Alme was a shell company registered under a frontman linked to Ariana's family. This meant the plan had been elaborated long before Karen's death. Ariana had been diverting funds for months to create this disappearance infrastructure. Philip looked at his mother, so fragile yet so serene, and felt a new wave of indignation. They hadn't just kidnapped her, they'd financed her captivity with the Ballard family money itself. Karen opened her eyes and looked at her son, intuiting his dark thoughts. "Don't let hate consume you, Philip. We've already won," she said softly. "They have to pay, Mom. They can't get away with it," he replied, gripping the wheel. "They'll pay, but with the law, not your soul," she sentenced wisely. Matthew leaned between the seats. "Mrs. Karen, did you know we were looking for you?" "I dreamed it, Matthew. I dreamed you guided my son. And the dreams of those with faith always come true," she replied, caressing the boy's dirty cheek. Philip's phone began ringing incessantly. It was Luis, the lawyer. "Philip, the police have seen the video. They have arrest warrants for Ariana and Jane. They're waiting for you to proceed," informed Luis triumphantly. "We're an hour from the city. Make sure the press is there. I want everyone to see who Ariana Miller really is," ordered Philip. He wanted the humiliation public, a social punishment that hurt more than jail. As they approached the urban area, the contrast between the mountain peace and city chaos became evident. Philip decided not to take his mother to the hospital immediately, where the media circus would be overwhelming. "We're going to the old house, Grandma's. No one will look for us there for now," he decided. It was the house where Karen had taught music, the happy place of his childhood, far from the cold penthouse and Ariana's memories. They arrived at the old mansion in a quiet neighborhood. It was dusty and closed, but still a home. Philip carried Karen down in his arms and took her to the main living room, where a piano covered with sheets slept waiting to be awakened. "We're home," she whispered, breathing the smell of old wood and memories. Matthew ran to open the curtains, letting the afternoon light bathe the room and reveal dust particles dancing in the air. Philip settled his mother on a comfortable sofa and called a fully trusted private doctor to check her there. "She's malnourished and dehydrated, but her heart is strong," was the preliminary diagnosis. With his mother safe and attended, Philip knew it was time to face the final act of this tragedy. "Stay with her, Matthew. You're the man of the house until I return," he told the boy. Giving him a responsibility Matthew accepted with puffed chest pride. Philip left the house, got in his car, and headed to the penthouse, where police and press already surrounded the building like vultures. Upon arriving, cameras pounced on his car, blinding him with flashes. He got out with head high, without a word, and entered the building escorted by police. He rode the elevator, feeling each floor ascended was a step closer to closing a painful cycle. Upon opening the apartment door, he found Ariana sitting on the sofa, surrounded by police, crying fake tears while trying to explain it was all a misunderstanding. Upon seeing Philip enter, she stood and tried running to him. "Philip, love, tell them it's a mistake. I only wanted to protect her," she cried desperately. Philip looked at her with indifference that cut more than any insult. "The only person you wanted to protect was yourself and your inheritance," said Philip calmly. He pulled the rosary from his pocket and showed it to her. "This rosary brought me the truth you tried to bury. It's over." Ariana signaled to the officers, who proceeded to handcuff her. Ariana kicked and screamed curses, finally showing her true face, a mask of hate and greed. As they took her away, Philip stayed alone in the empty penthouse. He looked around, the designer furniture, the artworks. Everything now seemed empty and meaningless. That place had never been a home, just a stage. He took some documents from the safe, the final proofs against Dr. Belmont, and left there never to return. His life was in the old house with his mother and the boy who'd saved him. He went down to the lobby and gave a brief statement to the press. "My mother is alive and safe. Justice will take care of the rest. I ask for privacy for our family." He got in his car and drove back to the old house, feeling a lightness in his soul he hadn't experienced in years. The grey truck's trail had ended in a cell for Ariana and freedom for him. Night fell over the city, but in the old house, the lights were on. Laughter and the timid sound of a piano being played by inexperienced but enthusiastic hands were heard. Philip entered and saw Matthew at the piano with Karen beside him, teaching basic notes, the perfect image of restored happiness. The days following the rescue were of healing calm in the family old mansion. The outside world still boiled with the Ballard case scandal, but within those walls, time seemed to flow at another pace. Philip had hired private security to keep journalists at bay, turning the house into a fortress of peace. Karen recovered strength quickly. Good food and, above all, the love from her son and Matthew were the best medicine. The house garden, abandoned for years, became Karen's personal project. From her wheelchair, she directed Philip and Matthew in pruning the rose bushes and weeding. "Plants, like people, just need a bit of attention to bloom again," she said, while Matthew watered with excessive enthusiasm, soaking his shoes. Philip, who'd never touched a gardening tool, found strange satisfaction in getting his hands dirty with soil, feeling connected to real life. Matthew had adapted to life in the house with surprising naturalness, though sometimes he hoarded food in his pockets, a survival habit hard to break. Philip observed him and promised himself to give that boy the future he deserved. He'd already started legal adoption proceedings, though he hadn't told Matthew yet, wanting it to be a surprise. The bond between the boy and Karen was unbreakable. They spent hours talking, she telling stories of famous composers, he narrating his street adventures. One afternoon, while having tea on the porch, Karen looked at the rosary Philip had left on the table. "You know, son, there were moments in the dumpster when I lost hope," she confessed with a distant gaze. "I thought you'd moved on with your life and forgotten me, but then I'd touch the rosary and feel that somehow you were thinking of me too." Philip took her hand, kissing her knuckles deformed by arthritis and hard work. "I never forgot you, Mom. I was just lost in a fog Ariana created. But your faith was my lighthouse," he replied. Matthew, listening attentively, chimed in. "Mrs. Karen prayed to the angels to protect you. I think the angels heard me too." Philip smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. "You were the angel, Matthew. Without you, none of this would have happened." Karen's physical recovery advanced, but the emotional one required facing what happened. One night, Philip found her crying silently in her room. "It's Ariana," she sobbed. "I loved her like a daughter. I don't understand how she could have so much darkness inside." Philip hugged her, understanding that betrayal from someone close hurts more than any physical wound. "Ambition blinds people, Mom. She chose money over love, and that was her fatal mistake." To cheer her up, Philip decided it was time to revive music in the house. He called a piano tuner to get the old grand instrument in the living room back in shape. When the technician finished, the piano's sound resonated clean and bright, filling the house with vibrant energy. "It's ready," announced Philip. Karen approached with her walker's help, caressed the ivory keys, and sat with difficulty but dignity. She began playing a Chopin piece, a melancholic nocturne that gradually transformed into something brighter and more hopeful. Her fingers, though a bit stiff at first, remembered every movement, every nuance. Matthew listened open-mouthed. He'd never heard live music of that quality. Philip leaned on the doorframe, closing his eyes and letting the music wash away the last residues of pain from his soul. Upon finishing, Karen had tears in her eyes but a radiant smile. "Music didn't abandon me," she said. "And neither did we," added Philip. Matthew approached the piano shyly. "Do you think I could learn?" he asked. "You have pianist hands, Matthew, long fingers, and a sensitive soul. We'll start tomorrow," replied Karen. That promise marked the start of a new routine. Mornings for garden, afternoons for music, the house filled with scales, chords, and laughter at mistakes. Philip saw his mother rejuvenate with each lesson, finding new purpose in teaching Matthew. The now clean and blooming garden became the stage for their private little concerts. However, legal reality knocked. The trial against Ariana and Dr. Belmont was about to begin, and Karen's testimony would be crucial. Philip feared the stress would affect her, but she was firm. "I have to do it, Philip, not for revenge, but so they don't do this to anyone else." Her strength continued to surprise him. The woman he thought fragile was actually steel. The night before the trial, the three sat in the garden under the stars. Philip pulled out official papers and handed them to Matthew. "What is this?" asked the boy, trying to read the legal print. "Adoption papers, Matthew. If you want, from today you'll be Matthew Ballard." The boy went mute, looking at the papers, then at Philip and Karen. Tears began running down his dirt-smeared cheeks from gardening. "For real, I'll have a family?" he asked with a broken voice. "You already have a family, son." "This is just so the world knows," said Karen, hugging him. Matthew threw himself into Philip's arms, crying with happiness. That night, in the reunion garden, a pact of love was sealed that no law or villain could ever break. The trial day dawned grey and rainy, as if the sky itself wept for the baseness of the crimes to be judged. Philip helped his mother dress in an elegant suit they'd bought days before, restoring her image as the respectable lady she'd always been. Matthew, now legally his son, wore a small tailored suit, looking nervous but determined to support his grandma. "Let's finish this," said Philip, guiding them to the armored car that would take them to court. The tribunal entrance was a hive of journalists, cameras, and onlookers shouting Karen's name, turned into a popular heroine. Philip protected his mother with his body, pushing through the crowd with security's help. Upon entering the courtroom, the atmosphere changed to tense, respectful silence. On the defendant's bench were Ariana and Dr. Belmont, both visibly gaunt and wearing orange prison jumpsuits. Ariana avoided looking at Philip, keeping her gaze fixed on the table, but Dr. Belmont looked around nervously, clearly willing to talk to save herself. The trial began with evidence presentation. Falsified documents, security video, Almi financial records. Each piece was another nail in Ariana's defense coffin. The prosecutor, a relentless man, narrated the story with clarity that horrified the jury. Karen's testimony turn came. Philip wheeled her to the stand. With a soft but firm voice, she recounted her kidnapping, dark days in the clinic, truck transfer, and life in the dumpster. There was no hate in her words, just painful truth. "They took my name, my home, and my dignity, but they couldn't take my hope that my son would come for me," she said, looking directly at Ariana, who broke down crying, unable to hold the gaze. Then the defense tried discrediting Karen by alleging senile dementia, a cruel strategy that enraged Philip, but the prosecutor called Matthew to the stand. The boy, with impressive bravery, told how he found Karen, how she taught him, and how she sent him to find Philip. His pure, innocent testimony dismantled any doubt about Karen's lucidity. "She's not crazy," said Matthew to the judge. "She's the sanest person I know because she never stopped loving her son." The climax came when Dr. Belmont, cornered, accepted a deal and confessed everything on the stand. She pointed to Ariana as the mastermind, detailing how she planned it all to seize the inheritance before marriage. She said the old woman was a hindrance, that Philip was weak and needed someone to make the tough decisions, declared the doctor. The room erupted in murmurs of indignation. Ariana screamed, "You lie," but no one believed her anymore. The verdict was quick and unanimous, guilty on all charges. The judge issued severe sentences, 30 years for Dr. Belmont and life imprisonment for Ariana Miller as the criminal organization's ringleader and for aggravated kidnapping. Upon hearing the sentence, Ariana collapsed, screaming Philip's name, begging forgiveness. Philip looked at her one last time, feeling only pity for such an empty being. He turned and left the room, pushing his mother, leaving the past behind. The tribunal exit was triumphant. People applauded and threw flowers as the Ballard's car passed. But for Philip, the true victory wasn't in Ariana's punishment, but in the peace his mother felt being heard and validated. "Justice was done, Mom," he said in the car. "Yes, son. Now we can close this book and start writing a new one," she replied, closing her eyes in relief. Back home, they celebrated with a quiet dinner. No champagne or luxuries, just hot soup and shared bread in the kitchen. Philip looked at his new family, his safe mother and adoptive son smiling. He knew the path hadn't been easy, but every tear and scare had been worth it. Human justice had acted, but divine justice had given them a second chance. That night, Matthew had a nightmare about the trial and woke screaming. Philip ran to his room and hugged him until he calmed. "It's over, Matthew. The bad guys can't hurt us anymore," he assured. "Promise you'll never leave me," begged the boy. "I promise on my life," swore Philip. He stayed with him until he slept, watching over his dreams, fully assuming his protective father role. Karen, from the hallway, observed the scene with a smile. Seeing her son become a father filled her heart with pride. She knew Philip would be a great father, much better than she'd been in her tough moments. The family was healing, and scars were becoming marks of strength. Justice's weight was no longer on their shoulders. Now they were free to fly. The next morning, every newspaper's front page showed Ariana handcuffed, and beside it a photo of Philip and Karen leaving the tribunal with dignity. "The End of the Nightmare," they titled. Philip took the newspaper, read it briefly, then threw it in the trash. He didn't need to read what he already knew. His attention was on the piano where Matthew was already practicing his morning scales, filling the house with music and future. Philip received a call from his company's board. They wanted him back, to resume control. "I'll return," said Philip, "but things will change. We're creating a foundation to help people like Matthew and my mother." He'd found a new purpose for his fortune, not to accumulate, but to serve. Justice didn't end in court. True justice was changing the world, so no one else had to suffer what they did. 6 months passed since the trial, and the old mansion's transformation was total. Philip had invested a significant part of his fortune in restoring and expanding it, turning it into the Philip Ballard Lighthouse, a music school and shelter for street kids. The freshly painted white walls shone under the sun, and the garden was full of colorful flowers, carefully tended by the students themselves. The official inauguration was scheduled for that afternoon. The place was full of kids who, like Matthew, had known life's hardness too soon, but now held violins, flutes, and guitars with hope. Karen, now recovered and walking with an elegant cane, supervised the last details with an orchestra director's energy. More to the right with that flower arrangement. "Philip, we want everything to look perfect," she ordered with affection. Philip obeyed happily, having traded boring boardrooms for the foundation's vitality. Seeing his mother so full of life was his greatest reward. Matthew, now a healthy and self-assured kid, ran from side to side helping his peers tune instruments. He'd become a natural leader, a big brother to newcomers, passing on the most important lesson: there is a way out. The ceremony started with Philip's speech. He stood at the microphone, looking at the crowd of neighbors, benefactors, and kids. "A while ago, my life was full of things but empty of meaning," he began. "A brave boy and a rosary taught me that the only thing that matters is love and truth. This house is a testament that darkness can never defeat light if we stay united." The applause was deafening, echoing through the neighborhood. Then came the most awaited moment, the concert. Karen sat at the grand piano, the same that had survived abandonment, and began playing the soft melody she used to play when Philip was a child. But this time, she wasn't alone. Matthew sat beside her to play 4 hands. The harmony between the elderly woman and the boy was perfect, a musical conversation narrating their story without words, from the dumpster's pain to the home's joy. The other kids joined with their instruments, creating a rich, emotive symphony that made those present cry. Philip watched from the front row with a heart swollen with pride. He saw Matthew's face in every child and heard his mother's voice in every note. They'd transformed a tragedy into a miracle, a place of death into a source of life. The music rose to the sky like a prayer of gratitude. Upon finishing the piece, Karen took the microphone. "This song is called The Reunion," she announced with a clear voice, "and it's dedicated to my son, who never gave up, and to my grandson, Matthew, who was my eyes when I couldn't see." Matthew ran to hug her, and Philip joined them on stage, melting into a 3-way embrace, symbolizing love's definitive victory. The press cameras, now welcome, captured the moment not as a scandal, but as inspiration. After the concert, there was a party in the garden with abundant food and laughter. Philip stepped away a moment to observe the scene from the porch. He saw his mother surrounded by kids asking for advice. He saw Matthew playing ball with his friends. He saw happy people. He pulled the rosary from his pocket, the same that started it all, and kissed it. It was no longer an object of pain, but a relic of triumph. A woman approached him. She was an old neighbor. "Your mother has worked a miracle here, Mr. Ballard," she said. "No, the miracle we all worked," corrected Philip. "She just gave us the initial note." The woman smiled and walked away. Philip looked at the sky, starting to fill with stars, and felt deep peace. He knew Ariana was paying her dues in a cold cell, but he no longer felt resentment, only indifference. His life was here, full of noise, music, and happy chaos. Matthew ran to him, sweaty and happy. "Did you see, Dad? I didn't mess up any note," he shouted excitedly, calling him Dad naturally for the first time in public. Philip felt his heart flip. He crouched and hugged him tightly. "You did it perfect, son. You're a master." That word Dad was worth more than all his company's stocks combined. The night advanced, and the party continued. Karen approached Philip and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you happy, son?" she asked. "More than I ever imagined, Mom," he replied sincerely. "Then my work here is done," she said with a mischievous smile. "Now it's your turn to keep the music playing." Philip nodded, accepting the legacy. The lighthouse shone in the night's darkness, a beacon of hope in the city. Philip knew there would be challenges in the future, that life wasn't a fairy tale, but he also knew that together they could face anything. The music kept playing, an eternal melody of love, family, and redemption that would never fade. And so, surrounded by his own, the millionaire who thought he had everything discovered that only now he truly had it all. If you liked this story, we'd greatly appreciate if you rated it from 1 to 10. Support us with a like and subscribe to our channel, Tales of Kindness. Comment from what place you're watching us. Thanks for your unconditional support in every story. Blessings to you and your family.